The strength and weakness of JD Vance is that he at least used to be a dedicated reader of the Matthew Iglesias blog, and it's good. I to be not like because he just, secretly agrees with me, whatever, but like he is a smart, widely read person who is genuinely interested in politics and public policy, just like I am.
Welcome back to Posting Through It. I'm Mike.
I'm Jared.
And we have a very exciting episode for you today with Luke Savage, a blogger, podcaster of the left, I would say, who is a critic of centrist neoliberal pundits. He's going to talk a little bit about Matt Iglesias, a guy who needs no introduction to most of our listeners because he is arguably the most famous blogger of the non-Trump MAGA world.
I think that's fair. I'm still hyped up from our first premium episode. That was so much fun to just kind of take a little bit of the sheen off and just make a little bit more raw of an episode, especially the conversation about Cracker Barrel just like sent me into a fit. So good. Your impression of your mom. It was so much in that episode was fun.
Yeah. And we'll be recording another one next week with a little bit of extra stuff from Luke in there on a discussion about chorus. And probably, how would you describe the chorus situation, Jared?
It is what's the language they use? Like a democratic influencer incubator operation or something. I don't know. Luke knew more about it than we did. So like Mike said, in addition to the interview you're going to hear today, we also talked to him a little bit about that. And you'll find that in this week's premium episode.
And we're going to talk a little bit also about Chicago. I just want to ask really briefly before we get into this episode, how you're feeling on the apparent eve of some sort of MAGA occupation.
It doesn't feel good. The sense I get from living here and from talking to some of the people, some of my friends here, is that a lot of people just kind of don't know what to expect yet. Is it going to look like it looked in DC? What will the scale be? Where are they going to be? A lot of stuff, as we're recording this now, is largely unknown. But if there's any protests or anything next week, I think I'm going to grab a field recorder and try to get out in the street and bring back some footage for next week's episode or something.
Yeah, we're going to get on to our episode, but before we do, we have to do a shout out for some of our new Patreon subscribers, people who gave a little bit extra this round.
In the executive club, we have Christina Stevens. Thanks, Christina. And in the platinum, we have Michael Bazico. This one just says the starting pitcher for the gold team and the bassist from Secretion. What the fuck? Thank you, whoever that is. Robinson DeLager and Mia's Sylvian. DeLaguerre? I don't. If I mispronounced any of those, please send us a message on Patreon. I'll do it again with the correct pronunciation. Yeah, it means the world to us that people are supporting the show. Every time I get the little email notification that someone new has signed up, it really warms my cold, dead heart.
I love the $5 subscribers as well. So this is an episode about professional opinion hammers. And
are we in that category?
I don't have any opinions.
We're like amateur opinion hammers.
Exactly. So Matthew Iglesias, sometimes referred as Matty, because you put the Y at the end of Matt, born May 18th, 1981, grew up in New York City and studied philosophy at Harvard University, where he was editor-in-chief of the Harvard Independent. He graduated there in 2003.
But before he graduated, he started blogging about politics and public policy, which is probably how most people know about Matty today. After school, he joined the American Prospect as a writing fellow, soon became a staff writer there. He went on to write for publications like The Atlantic, Think Progress, Slate. At Slate, he authored a column called Money Box that was pretty popular at the time. And in 2014, he co-founded Vox Media with Ezra Klein and Melissa Bell. And he served there as the senior editor and co-host of the podcast, The Weeds. He left Vox in November 2020 to start a Substack newsletter called Slow Boring, which now earns, according to some reports, I'm not sure where that's at today, but the ones we found were $1.4 million annually from his nearly 18,000 subscribers. He also joined the Niskanen Center as a senior fellow in 2020 and is a columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. Iglesias has authored books, including 2012's The Rent is Too Damn High and 2020's 1 Billion Americans.
For someone so successful, you'd expect Iglesias to have some pretty good takes. Well, that has not always been the case. He spends a lot of his time criticizing progressives. He sort of punches left, I think is the way to describe what he does. And he doesn't always land a punch when he throws it.
So how does a guy like Matt Iglesias rise up to become such an influential voice in politics like he is today? The opinion pages of the national press, and now a new rank and file of independent writers, have made millions churning out milquetoast takes just like Matty has. Contrast that to so many talented journalists and news analysts who are out here just struggling in between their one-off freelance gigs, trying to take whatever they can. What gives?
Was a monstrous thing, grotesque and inhuman. I'm floating downstream into the arms of my Fox River dream. I'm longing to be.
We're pleased to have on the podcast Luke Savage, who is not a professional wrestler. He's a political writer that you might have read in outlets like Jacobin, The Washington Post, Toronto Star, New Statesman. He's the co-host of the Film and Politics podcast, Michael and Us, and he does some independent writing for his own publication. Luke, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
I made a joke before we started recording. We have Matt Iglesias written down in our show notes so many times that I'm terrified I'm going to call you Matt. But I've been reading your work for the longest time, and I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Oh, cheers, and likewise.
And talk about great takes. Great takes. So we're all here today to discuss our hero, Matt Iglesias, who you wrote a glowing profile of on your Substack. well, not quite. So before you came in, we did just a quick look at Matt's career, but I want to start out by talking and hearing from you about the blogging years of liberal media, because that is where Matt Iglesias really cut his teeth and made his name. This was like Bush era sort of, I guess social media was around, but what was that time like? And what role did blogs play in media at the time that Matt was coming up? So like early, mid 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because it feels like everything is blogging now. So it's like, I guess this will come up later, but, the free press and various other Substacks that are just, are essentially blogs are now also kind of media organizations. So we need to step back a bit in time. All of this feels very anachronistic now, but in the early 2000s, the blogosphere was greeted as kind of this, utopian, radically democratic thing that was going to revolutionize citizenship and democracy and all that. And I think particularly within the Democratic Party, which was kind of rudderless through much of the Bush era, people were really looking for, as they are now in different ways, what is our one simple trick? And the answer for many was the bloggers. The bloggers are going to save us. It wasn't just Matt Iglesias. It was also people like Marcos Melitsas. And actually, there's a very good piece about this published some years ago in Jacobin by Dan O'Sullivan about Marcos Melitsas. And he really captures what this era was like. This was going to be...
Just interject, that was the Daily Kos, right? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, the Daily Kos or Kos, and this was a populist vanguard. This was going to be, this was going to be the thing that was going to finally neutralize the right. And actually, the Kos heads had they did have one real, if in retrospect, pretty small political victory, because and somewhere, I did this on my podcast years ago, there's a documentary about it where they primaried Joe Lieberman successfully. They found a guy who is possibly currently the governor of Connecticut, I can't remember, Ned Lamont, and they just got him to say, oh yeah, I'm against the Iraq War, I guess, sure. Defeated Lieberman in the primary. Lieberman, of course, ran as an independent and rinsed them. But so that was kind of the high watermark of like the liberal bloggers, as far as I know, in terms of like a real world electoral impact. But I was interested in this, I suppose, and dealt with it in my piece because I think this environment was conducive to a particular type of writing. And Dan O'Sullivan as well captures this really well in that old essay of his, because this really was the birth of the modern take as we understand it. This is before Twitter and social media, obviously, but it's an inherently reactive way of thinking about and writing about politics. It's just responding to things very often, very, very quickly. So it favors a kind of generalism where you never really become an expert in anything, but the people who are good at it, and Matt Iglesias in his own way was very good at this, they were able to convey a kind of aura of expertise, right, and of authority. And when they were done with one thing, they just moved on to something else and kind of didn't really talk about that previous thing again. So, one morning you wake up and you're at Harvard, I guess he went to, and you're a pro-war blogger, and then, I don't know, a few years later, you're a health policy wonk, and then, I don't know, a decade on from that, you flirt with supporting Bernie Sanders, and you're like, there's actually an interview or a conversation with Matt Iglesias and Liza Featherstone and Bhaskar Sankara in an issue of Jacobin, I think, in 2019 or 2020, and you just cycle through this stuff, and it's... I would say, humbly, not conducive to kind of intellectual consistency or being right about many things, but at least for some people, that it's been the foundation for a very successful kind of media career. And in Iglesias's case, right, it's led to real world political influence. Like, he was one of the guys in the Biden White House, which, if you read his takes, is kind of an amazing thing to contemplate and, explains a lot.
I also think it sort of says something about the Democratic Party in general when you look at Matt's, sort of the way he flits between different viewpoints, right? And the way he just goes to different places. The sort of inconsistency of the Democrats seems to be highlighted by the fact that Matt is a favored pundit. But I want to ask you about that, which is, how would you describe his ideology? Are you able to do that even? Because, I think that's one of the more challenging things. He's often portrayed by opponents of progress, for lack of a better word, as being kind of a liberal leftist. But is that like really what Matt believes? Is that really who he is?
It's really interesting, and I think this is a question in some ways best left to philosophers. It's very...
That was his major, wasn't that his major in
the
Harvard?
philosophy department back at Harvard?
It was his major, but no,
blog.
Yeah, I don't know what the platonic form of Matt Iglesias is. I think if there is an ideology, obviously, and there's a crude answer to this, which is his ideology is just he's he's part of the neoliberal left, or whatever you want to call it. He's just a neoliberal proper. But I think his ideology is I think, is dictated by primarily by his relationship to institutional power at a given moment, and by the imperatives of, a media career that is has very much been guided by guided by institutional power, by a desire to have influence within an influential but in other ways quite parochial kind of sect of Beltway thinking. I think trying to pin down the ideology of someone like Matty Iglesias in terms of, like, fundamentally, this is what his philosophy is. Like, fundamentally, this is what he thinks about, I don't know, human nature or justice or something like that. I don't know if that's possible. But I do think if there's a consistent through line, it's in this constantly shifting relationship to institutional power, to establishment opinion, and that kind of thing. And I think you see with his very brief and kind of only ever partial flirtation with Bernie Sanders, like you can just see in a more basic sense, there's just opportunism there, right? Like, if something sort of seems like it's maybe ascendant, some intellectual or political tendency or whatever, he kind of thinks, I want a piece of this, maybe I'll just kind of put my toes on this, or plant my flag here, at least temporarily. And then, I think I can't exactly remember when that Jacobin issue was that Iglesias appeared in, but within a few weeks of Super Tuesday, as I recall, he was kind of back to his old tricks. So
that really feel like the Biden years, there was this sort of suggestion online, or this feeling for some people at least, that like we were getting like a neoliberal facade, but it was like a Bernie administration at the core. But I feel like in retrospect, it's actually reversed, where there was some symbolic Bernieism just around the edges, but ultimately the same neoliberal whatever. And somebody could even argue that Bernie himself is a neoliberal in some ways. It depends on your definition of it. But I want to just read this one thing from you, which is, you said, vapid contrarianism, off the charts dorkiness. Love that. This is really true. An obtuse penchant for moral and ideological incuriosity that frequently slides into intellectual malpractice. These have been the longstanding hallmarks of Iglesias' rather insipid style, and for what it's worth, they've formed the constituent ingredients of a very successful and lucrative career. So,
couldn't have said it better myself.
Yes, I thought it was such a great description, though. Like that, that's really like the heart of like why I was like, oh my god, we gotta get him on. It's such a great description, and I just curious, in your read of the American public, where sort of just left thinking is punched upon so frequently, where people are just constantly trying. Why is this popular? Why does he have, why is he so successful? I mean, the guy has is making a fortune on his Substack. Still, he was able to found Vox, which is a company that still exists. It's still going. He's really successful, and you see like everybody from the liberal center to the left is really struggling in this media landscape that is dominated by Trumpism. So, what is it about Matt that's able? Because everything we've heard so far is that he's very wishy-washy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that he has been maybe a little savvier in a crass sort of way when it comes to how he's maneuvered, because obviously he's always been a liberally coded figure, and as we saw, with the in the Biden era, he had the ear of the Biden White House, as I already alluded to. But I think he plays, his perception is different from that of someone like Ezra Klein, I think, obviously, who is his colleague at Vox, who I think is more explicitly or overtly a liberal, and kind of more like a sort of big D Democrat. I feel like, and like functionally, that's what Iglesias has tended to be as well. But I think he is much better at. I think there was a phrase I used earlier in the piece to this effect. He's much better at kind of speaking in this register of transgressive free thinking, like, like I exist in the neutral ground of wonkery, and I'm just giving you like the facts, and they're the facts that that aren't allowed or permitted within the sclerotic partisan binary of America's political conversation or something. And then, of course, the arguments are just, they're just often kind of the center right arguments you get anywhere else, or in the Obama era, the kind of centrist arguments in favor of like why the Affordable Care Act is actually revolutionary, or whatever the thing is, or why it's better than single payer health care, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that style has an obvious appeal because, there's lots of, I guess, if I'm being to give a non-cynical read of it, I mean, I think a lot of people who are curious and politically interested, they're kind of put off by the partisan binary, the way that so much of American media is so bifurcated between like team red and team blue. And, a lot of people rightly don't feel represented by that. They feel that there's certain subjects that are, I don't know, taboo or that aren't being discussed properly. And so because of that, there's, a whole parasitic ecosystem, some of it very good independent media, some of it, good independent left media, and some of it media that gives you the same orthodoxies that you would get in kind of the, traditional Beltway media. But now it's just served to you with this different gloss where this is, independent mindedness and, transgressive free thinking. And I think Iglesias has been more in that style of pundit than someone like Ezra Klein, or we came up earlier, Marcos Militzis, right? Who's once when was that he brought Nancy Pelosi like how many red roses was it? Iglesias will be on the phone with the White House, but I don't think he would be bringing Biden red roses.
You would expect somebody at that kind of stature who's on the phone with the White House, who, policy aides are reading his slow, boring blog, to have some pretty important contributions to the discourse. And from what I've seen, with full disclosure, I'm not a Matty boy. I'm not a diehard subscriber to slow, boring, or a reader even. These wonky takes always seem to align with like the hot take is like, well, according to the data and whatever, we should let housing developers run buckshot on all American cities. Or, the situation in Gaza was completely overblown by hysterical activists. But now I've seen the data and it's not ideal, and in your piece, which is beautifully titled "The Agony and Ecstasy of Matty Iglesias," you also talk about he kind of through this wonkery, through this sort of reflexive, surface level contrarianism. Matt also has this knack for just being prophetically wrong about things, or just like really carving himself out on losing positions. Can you tell me about that? And also, do you think that sort of rhetorical style lends itself to doing that, or is this like a stars align kind of thing? This guy who happens to have gotten just a lot of really big issues terribly wrong throughout his history is also adopting this style, or do you think there's a relationship there?
I mean, I think being completely shameless about like you argue something with great conviction one day and you say all the data supports this, and then you make a different argument like a few months later and you don't really acknowledge or engage seriously with the fact that you seem to be saying something quite different. I mean, the thing is, in the past, that would not have been, I don't think in previous media environments that would have served you very well. I mean, in earlier eras, I don't even think the technology really existed to do that, because there were only a few TV networks and a few newspapers that sort of guided the national conversation and were really consumed by a mass public. But now in the social media era, where everything is so transitory, like a news story can be the biggest thing for a few hours, and then a day later, nobody even remembers, what happened. And meanwhile, the media itself is so fragmented. It's so fragmentary. It's so diffuse, I think that really lends itself to, or it makes advantageous this style of commentary where you can just kind of say you make one argument one day, and then a few months later, you say something kind of completely different, and that's advantageous, right? Because the vibes shift, the preferences and the tastes, if you want, of media consumers, like those are also kind of ephemeral and shifting now in a way that they weren't before. And so, it's advantageous. I just don't think it's, in a sort of, in the sense of like getting subscribers and being talked about and getting media appearances and so on. And in his case, having political influence, but it's not conducive to any kind of intellectual or ideological consistency. And as you were just saying, Jared, I mean, it lends itself as well to just being spectacularly wrong. So, I mean, I run through a few examples in the piece, and I won't like read my own paragraph here because people can just read it for themselves. But I mean, my favorite one, just to highlight it, was if you look at the two positions that Matty Iglesias has taken on the Kamala Harris presidential campaign. The first was that this is a great campaign. It's like, this is, centrist patriotism, all that wokeness stuff and all that left-wing stuff. And, that there's a slippage with those terms often in this style of commentary. Like sometimes those are the same things. Sometimes they're different things. Again, that kind of shifts as needed. But at one point, sort of around the time of the DNC, so just over a year ago, I suppose, Kamala Harris is running this great campaign. I think I've got it here. This is Iglesias on the DNC. The themes were joy and freedom. The economic message was aspirational. The visions of diversity emphasized inclusion and equality, and the discussion of environmental issues was overwhelmingly focused on clean air. We got the version of Harris that we should have had in 2020, the career prosecutor who put criminals in jail, and as Attorney General tackled a wide range of wrongdoing, and who fundamentally believes in imposing sanctions on bad actors. After he tweeted, Kamala Harris gave a convention speech that embraced patriotism, reaffirmed the American alliance with Israel, and recommitted the Democratic Party to an ethic of liberal pluralism, and America's top centrist culture war publication pivoted to economics. So I'm actually not sure what he's complaining about at the end there. But then, later he says that the Kamala Harris campaign was actually captured by the groups. It was too left wing. By the groups, by the way, a phrase I had never heard. This is great too, and I guess this is probably a function.
How many all like the groups?
Y'all ever heard of groups?
This also speaks to like and this is like a feature of, I think, the contemporary kind of media environment as well, and the information environment. There's like a mimetic quality to it. We think of memes as images, but like they're also just turns of phrase, right? I had never heard of the groups until like centrist apologia after Kamala Harris lost started coming out. It's the same way you see this on the right, and like Jared, I'm sure you encounter it in your work all the time, where there's always a new bête noire it's really the same, performs the same function as something you heard previously. So, it's cultural Marxism, it's critical race theory, it's 2015, it was political correctness. It's this constantly shifting thing, but it's this like floating signifier for something that's just kind of the same. And the groups is like that for neoliberalism, right? Because it's just the same. It's Bill Clinton's like Sister Soldier moment, which is all these people know how to do. It's you win by distancing yourself from the left, and it's extremely funny that they're kind of still trying to repeat that formula in a Democratic Party where the left is like less powerful than it's maybe ever been. Anyway, now I'm digressing. Just to return to the basic point, to sort of say one moment that Kamala Harris is running this great campaign, that's built around all these things. And then I've got the tweet here. This is March 2025. So this is less than a year after what I just read you. He says, I understand that leftists have a self-interest in saying Harris, quote, ran a moderate's dream campaign, unquote. But I think a more journalistic method would be to ask moderates whether or not Harris ran the campaign of their/our dreams. And it's like, well, we have the receipts. We know what you said. We know what you wrote. And I'm not even, to be fair, I'm not even saying you can't sort of change your mind about things, or you can't make an argument for something one day and make a different argument the next. We all do that. That's a necessary part of, this business and of writing about politics. But you need to acknowledge it and engage with the fact that your ideas have shifted. And I feel like Iglesias is uniquely non-introspective when it comes to doing that.
It seems like a different flavor of Trumpism in a way, with different politics. I don't want people to mistake what I'm saying. I'm not comparing him ideologically to Trump or even as a person, to Trump.
I will. Fuck it. We ball, dude. Matt, you
base Jared over here.
But yeah, I mean, Trump comes in with the hat that says Trump was right about everything. That is like the more fuck you version of this, not willing to deal with one's previous statements about things, right? I mean, it's just almost the same thing. Like, Trump will always just run over anything that he said 2 days ago, and just he'll just tell you, like, no, the sky is green actually, and whatever. This is a more passive, softer approach where he just kind of just ignores the things that he previously said and just starts to speak, write sweetly about his new opinion.
Well, this analogy hadn't really occurred to me, but I think you're right that these are certainly parallel things, even if they express themselves somewhat differently. And I think they are both, in some ways, products of the same sort of media environment, because again, everything is so fragmentary and diffuse now. The news is something we get by just like scrolling on the slot machines we all carry around in our pockets all day. And so, yeah, that doesn't lend itself to, in the same way we've been talking about that not lending itself to, consistency of ideas in writing. It doesn't lend itself to political or ideological consistency either in the realm of politics. And of course, Trump is, originally just a product of TV, right? And then later of posting. Like, he's a guy who posted his way into the Oval Office, which, to my knowledge, is not something anyone had ever done before. And yeah, now he's a second-term U.S. president. And yeah, as you say, he's just like, even his signature policies and initiatives, he's completely inconsistent about what the rationale is for them. So I'm talking to you guys from Canada, where Trump has variously threatened to annex the country, make it the 51st state, and then the next day he's dealing cordially over the phone with like the Prime Minister of Canada. Sometimes the justification for this global trade war is we're going to reindustrialize the Midwest. Like, factories will spring up like dandelions if you just put up the right tariff barriers. Sometimes it's a negotiation, it's a shakedown of other countries, of U.S. allies, and sometimes it's supposed to replace, the tariff revenues are supposed to replace income tax. There's no consistency, but again, in this environment, that can be quite advantageous.
100%. I want to bring up one example that we get into in your piece, because it's not Matt going back and forth over the course of 6 months or a year. It's him going back and forth over the course of minutes. And like,
you hate efficiency, Mike? Is this the new thing? Slow boring blog incoming.
Don't you think, as a writer, people should be able to adapt to an evolving situation?
Yeah, he changed his mind, Mike. What's the problem?
Well, one thing we get into a lot on Posting Through It are these moments in recent history that really shift people's brains in major ways. And obviously, October 7th is one of them. It's obviously a really dark moment, but it really changes just the way so many people speak and behave. And Matt is one of them, and I think he gets really crossed up here. So, and I feel like this exchange he has on Twitter with Matt Brunig, who's I guess a policy analyst is the best way to describe him. He's most famous for he always had a big Twitter presence.
He's like the non-dark kind of wonk. He's like the good wonk.
And yeah, I mean, socialist. I think he's outspoken socialist is a good way to describe his point of view. And they kind of get into it a little bit about Palestine. This guy Noah Opinion, I think I'm just going to call him that because he calls himself that. He says that like leftists primarily use Palestine as a wedge issue to gain power, right? Like, because that's what his point is. And Brunig, I think, accurately responds by saying that, like, actually, they've been agitating for it a lot longer than this. They've been going back way before October 7th. It just happened that the issue became much more central in the discourse, really, is what he says. And then Iglesias jumps in to say that, quote, leftists don't really care about anything they talk about. And then, like, after another exchange says, actually, left politics relies on idealistic young dupes.
Yeah, so he goes from being like, these are they're cooking up these strategies, doing all this, adopting these issues insincerely to pursue their own power. And then they're like, actually, they're just a bunch of dumb college kids that don't know anything, that fall for nonsense. And it's like, which is it? Which is it?
Yeah, I found this fascinating.
Is this a gang
I
of
feel like
idiots,
this
or is it like a powerful cabal you must counter?
I feel like this had to have like inspired you doing it, because there's just like it's sort of like an enough is enough moment when people go into a psych ward and stuff like that. It's not usually just like one thing that happens where they go crazy or whatever. It's usually like a buildup of a very long time, and then something hits like a really pitch point. So I feel like this is like it's like, okay, I need to blog because he changed his opinion within 2 posts.
Well, Michael, you are peering directly into my soul, because this is exactly what made me write the piece. I did not wake up on that particular morning and think I must write about Matthew Iglesias, but I saw that, and honestly, this exchange really did unlock something for me. I feel like I understand Matt Iglesias so much better after seeing this exchange. And you asked me earlier about, one of you asked me about, what is Iglesias's ideology? And in the last part of my piece, I'm trying to grapple with that question just in the last few paragraphs here, because I really think that there's a fundamental, there is an underlying consistency in this exchange that he has with Matt Brunig, I think, which is that so obviously there's the clear inconsistency that Brunig points out, where we've talked about it already. I don't need to rehash it, but I think there's the consistency is that Matt Iglesias just assumes that because he thinks and behaves in a certain way, everybody else must do this too. So because he belongs to a political faction that sort of periodically gets together in the recent version of this was Welcome Fest, these sad convention center or hotel ballroom events that are always sponsored by, venture capitalists or dark money groups. Welcome Fest. I think Michael Bloomberg was part of that. You get together every 5 years or whatever, and there's a rebrand, and you're like now telling a different story about the same kind of neoliberal agenda that you were aligned with before. But now it's got new branding, and these kinds of things, and Welcome Fest is a good example of this. They are quite literally attempts to build factional power, right? They are, they are attempts to win factional disputes, right? And that's what's so funny, right? Because this is the groups, right? Like this was a room full of people whose entire premise is that the Democrats lose because they are captured by these, these very powerful, this powerful constellation of like these cloistered kind of interest groups that make them take unpopular positions, and like we need to build we need to have a response that's based on common sense. Then meanwhile it's like, okay, and who's sponsoring this? It's like it's like a small constellation of dark money. Yeah, it's it's finance capital, it's real estate, it's Bitcoin, it's whatever. So yeah, I mean, it is very much just the the mirror image of the thing that they, or rather the actual image of the thing that they claim to be fighting. But yeah, I think in this exchange, you really see something really important comes out here, because you see a type of thinking that is unable to understand or comprehend the fact that like not everybody just thinks in terms of like immediate factional power, or builds their takes, kind of like reverse engineers their takes based on what they think may be advantageous in a particular time. And I mean, I think when it comes to Palestine and Gaza, right? Like that's the seriousness of that issue and the reality of what's going on, I think really brings all of this into so much sharper relief, because like Palestine, Gaza is just another factional fight, really. Like Iglesias can't comprehend the idea that people feel moral outrage about, I don't know, death squads, like shooting people who are getting aid, trying to get aid, or any other number of horrors I could list off here. So I think that this is a really important exchange, and it tells us a lot about how, some people's minds work.
Well, I want to stay on Palestine for 1 second, because this one is the one that really bothers me, like in a deep way, and I think is most indicative of the reactionary core of this type of punditry, because I just think it's really important to kind of pull apart here. So here's what he said about Rashida Tlaib. That she's Palestinian. It makes perfect sense for her to be mad at Israel and fired up about it. What's sus is all the people who aren't Palestinian and seem to care 1,000 times more about this than any other humanitarian issue. I once met a Syrian Christian who told me with passion and detail about how his people had been wronged by American policy, and I took it very seriously. But it would be weird. It would be weird if some average college student was obsessed with this. Now, the reason why this is so upsetting to me, this is not in your piece, but this I pulled from elsewhere. The reason why this bothers me so much is, it's like I am allowed to be upset about Gaza. My mother is allowed to be upset about Gaza, but Jared is supposed to be like, "Oh, that sucks, man."
It seems like the argument is like the way I should feel about it is like, damn. Sucks for those brown people. Good thing I'm white. It's like that seems to be the thinking or the rationale offered here.
Yeah, but like, am I not allowed to feel, that, something is horrible, going on in Ukraine? I'm not allowed to feel that like something for conscripted soldiers who are sent to die in that war. On both sides. I mean, like, am I not allowed to feel like something should be done about it? I mean, that's crazy to me. And are we not allowed to feel like something should be done about genocide in general? Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, isn't it the most urgent human phenomenon? Right? Like when it starts to happen, it's a very urgent phenomenon. Like all of humanity, when we find out about it, reacts. I feel like that is like the thing, or should, right? That was the whole point of Never Again rhetoric, right? So
it's just hard for me to imagine him going out and trying to apply this argument on a different issue, like the Rwandan genocide, right? Is like, imagine if he was like, why are Americans so concerned about Rwandans? It would make sense that this Rwandan person is upset, but why should we care? Or why would people be mad about that on a large scale? It just, like, if you put it in a different context, I feel like it sounds even more ridiculous.
Well, I'm interested to hear Luke's thoughts, but I mean, for me, and what I hear in this, to sort of tee you up, is that like there's policy with the Democratic Party, there's positions of power that are very closely tied with Israel, and like, let's not get crazy, like getting too involved in this matter. It's okay. We can not throw Arabs under the bus. That's the nice thing to say. That's the only way this differs from Trumpism.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot that could be said here, and I think there's a number of ways to interpret this. So first of all, would Iglesias have made that argument about, I don't know, like Arab Democrats in Michigan during like the last presidential election? Like, was it okay for them to refrain from voting for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz? Like, I don't know. This feels like another example of inconsistency. I suppose that goes without saying. I think this is also maybe kind of a learned reflex. This is kind of this is a sort of standpoint theory argument that I feel like you might have heard in a different context from like a Hillary Clinton supporter during the 2016 primary or something like that. Like only people directly affected by an issue can be concerned about an issue, something like that. This was also, I mean, I saw this from kind of Democratic, DNC aligned influencers and commentators and so on. Like last year during the election, like this was kind of a line that like, well, you're allowed to care about this if you're Palestinian, if you're directly affected by it. If you're not, it's weird and it's actually evil and it's helping Trump if you don't, if you're outraged that like children are being killed in airstrikes or whatever. Anyway, like obviously the assertion that you can't care about something like this, if you're not like directly affected in it, like if you don't have relations in Gaza City or whatever, is absurd on its face. But the entire premise of this is just wrong because, the U.S.-Israeli relationship, the U.S.'s specific relationship under both Biden and Trump to what's going on in Gaza, like this isn't some peripheral issue. This isn't some like arcane or esoteric thing that students on Columbia campus or people who protested elsewhere just picked at random. Like this goes to the heart of so many things that are so fundamental to the problems people have with the U.S. government and with the bipartisan consensus on foreign policy and on Israel-Palestine especially. So all of this is just wrong on its face. And it's not as if the entire U.S. political class and the leaderships of both parties don't talk about this incessantly and don't have a very, say the least, one-sided view of it. So the idea that people reacting to all of this is the problem, or is illegitimate or invalid or disproportionate in some way, that's as absurd as everything else we've talked about here.
I want to zoom out a bit because we've been talking about Matt Iglesias. He is one of the most successful people to take up this kind of posture in opinion writing or wonkery, that reflexive contrarianism. But there are like a whole roster of kind of quote unquote anti-woke, ostensibly liberal people that are seemingly beloved by establishment news media, by key figures in politics, and it just kind of it's hard not to get the sense that any kind of progressive or leftist thinking is treated in major newsrooms as a kind of riffraff, and it seems that speaking out against it or positioning yourself against it is understood by executives and leadership and by a bunch of influential people in this country as proof that of somebody's like neutrality. Sure, maybe you say the Republicans got this wrong, but also these college kids are crazy. Like then you become this like curiosity or this like sort of it's not a view from nowhere, but it's like it makes you more curious, right? And I think a prime example is some of this reporting that's been going around this week as we're recording about, and this may go through, maybe will not have gone through by the time this episode comes out, but CBS Paramount looks like it's going to buy the Free Press, which is a sort of contrarian, reactionary publication headed up by Barry Weiss, who used to work at the New York Times. Should also note CBS Paramount settled with Trump for $16 million over a frivolous lawsuit alleging, I guess, election interference, defamation, or whatever. They say an interview they aired with Kamala Harris was edited. Everything's edited. It's idiots. Like, this guy used to work in TV. Of course, duh, it's edited. Okay. They have like 5 minutes and the interview is 20. It's edited. Sorry. But I'm just kind of curious your thoughts about like the state of the media landscape. And, you talked earlier about, kind of the non-cynical take on why, audiences might be attracted to this kind of posturing from columnists and writers. They feel, part of it is this like forbidden fruit dynamic, right? Where it's like they're discussing things that aren't normally discussed, or maybe the audience feels aren't properly discussed elsewhere. People are tired of that sort of bifurcation, red versus blue media stuff. But in terms of the industry itself, just the broader news media industry, that also plays a huge role in propping these people up. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about that as somebody, a loud and proud leftist writer who's making it out there.
Sure. I mean, we talked about, Iglesias's lineage in early 2000s blogging. And I think what you're talking about here also has kind of roots in the Bush era. Or I'd have to think more about it, whether these are the roots of it. But there's certainly parallels to the present day, because in the Bush era, particularly as there are all these liberals, writers and politicians and so on who quite enthusiastically supported the war on terror in the early years. They supported the invasion of Iraq, and I think to do that was a little uncouth, particularly if we're talking about media audiences, right? George Bush was not somebody who was well liked, particularly by sort of 2002, 2003, by a lot of readers of liberal newspapers and things like that. And that was really the heyday of these sort of, people who came out of the new atheist movement. They were these kind of right liberals who were, basically neoconservative in how they talked about the world. They essentially shared the Bush administration's kind of Manichaean view of the world, but they gave it a liberal gloss, right? It was about sort of humanitarianism and the spreading of Enlightenment values, and it made the bogeyman was religion, which was useful because it sort of created distance from the would-be dim-witted Southerner president who was an evangelical Christian and so on. But it also allowed you put a liberal gloss on Islamophobia as well. And I think there's the parallels could be questioned or kind of interrogated in detail here. But I think there's something analogous with what a figure like Barry Weiss does, I'm forgetting all the people that were included in that awful New York Times article about the intellectual dark web, some years back.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I'm getting flashbacks, dude. I feel my blood pressure go up.
Because a lot of these people, right, they start out in these pretty mainstream, like these often liberal, newspapers. Like Barry Weiss was a columnist at the New York Times. Or, you also have the Never Trump conservatives, which is, certainly a related or adjacent phenomenon, though it has some differences as well. But I really think what's going on here is this is just a way you can kind of package right-wing ideas for a liberal readership, and I think that is an especially useful thing in the present day because Trump is just such a loathed figure, right? Like you can't be a liberal and like Donald Trump, but there are also a lot of particularly affluent, maybe older liberals who really don't like certain things about the Democratic Party. There's things about contemporary culture and social progress that they are very suspicious of and don't like. They're maybe suffused in kind of the idioms of the Cold War and of just like earlier eras of American politics. And I think that creates an audience that's very primed for conservative ideas, but in this sort of anti-Trump package, or if not explicitly anti-Trump, in a kind of package of, I used the phrase earlier, transgressive free thinking. because
Yeah.
you're not. This isn't Fox News. This is smart. It's in the New York Times.
Sure. I think like it really makes me think about how challenging it is to overcome this media environment, because there's one example. I don't want to go too deep into his work, but Jesse Singal is, for an example, a guy who's superficially liberal, Democrat type. That's his punditry brand, but most of his career is really based on trying to poke holes in pro-trans arguments and that sort of thing. And he's sort of known for being an anti-woke guy, and that's really the choice that a lot of very casual people see if they go into X or something like that. They're really looking at Nate Silver, a guy who's has a perception, for people who are not really locked in, of being a liberal, right? And Jesse Singal and these guys, Noah Opinion. I'm not going to call him by his actual name. I'm just going to keep calling him Noah Opinion. These type of figures, and that sort of is the choices, that and Jack Posobiec, and it really has a way of elevating Trumpism to me, because it's really a choice. They're sort of I use this metaphor all the time, but the Washington Generals to the Harlem Globetrotters of MAGA. It just sort of kind of just getting their donation money and making these little arguments that kind of in small ways help the right. I don't know if you agree with that analysis, but that's just kind of the way I feel when looking at that landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with Singal only by reputation. I haven't read his work, so I don't think I can comment on that specifically. I mean, I guess one thing I would bring in here, though, which I alluded to already, was again, I think the Never Trump conservatives are an important part of this story, even though they are a little bit different from some of the other things we've been talking about, because. Yeah, I mean, they are officially conservatives in the way that somebody like. Obviously, Iglesias is not. But all of these people, also given platforms by big publications and newspapers. These figures like Bret Stephens, or my fellow countryman, actually also a former editor, or at least contributor, of the same student newspaper at the University of Toronto that I once edited, Mr. David Frum. These people that they were anti-Trump, but they didn't want to. They didn't want to say I'm abandoning conservatism, and I think it's really important. And liberals have become their audience, but I think it's really important to underscore that to a certain extent, writers like that, liberals have always been like a big part of their audience. Like these publications, like National Review or The Federalist, which are ostensibly like these are the outlets of the conservative intelligentsia. I think in some ways that's true, but historically the role they've played is really just to sort of represent conservatism in this idealized form with this kind of cerebral intellectual gloss for an audience that is partly a liberal one, because there's so many kind of Democrat-brained people who, even if they don't like the Republican Party, they also have all these very idealized impressions of it, and they want it. They crave a politics that is, two respectable interlocutors sort of going back and forth. And so, I guess I'm realizing this is somewhat unrelated to the other things we're talking about, but since the general theme here is sort of media grifts, this is another one, and it's certainly related.
They just wish that mom and dad would stop fighting. And
I was going to say quickly about your you referenced David Frum. I'm just going to give you a little fact to keep in your back pocket about him, since you have this, you guys are countrymen and et cetera, et cetera. Frum actually blurbed Peter Brimlow's book Alien Nation, which is now a seminal text of the racist right. Brimlow, of course, famous white nationalist. And was just basically calling him a genius in so many words. So a lot of people don't know that, but
I mean,
for the Toronto Star, I think.
I was not aware of that particular From take. I will have to check it out as a bit of a From aficionado. But I don't know how many years ago now, but I reviewed From's I think the first of the two sort of big anti-Trump books that he wrote, which was they were big bestsellers. In fact, I still sometimes see them. I think they're still in print, or at least the second one is. And I think the first one was called Trumpocracy. That's the one I reviewed. And this was a book that, sort of various older people who are sort of like politically liberal left type people in my life, they got this book. They approached me with it. They were like, "Have you read this? It's really good. It's a really powerful critique of Trump." So I decided I'd read it. And I mean, the stuff he was able to put in his book, that again, the audience for this is entirely like anti-Trump liberals. He compares Black Lives Matter. He says Black Lives Matter and MAGA are like equivalent movements. He talks about how, one of his big criticisms of Trump is that he's such a mercurial figure that, he's not going to be able to get the coveted tax cut for, billionaires and millionaires that Republicans have been seeking for generations. And, Dave, if you're listening, Donald Trump has you beat there. They got it done. There's elsewhere a section where he's talking about Bernie Sanders and the younger people who were attracted to the Bernie Sanders movement because of things like Medicare for all, and then he compares this to the brown shirts. So this was a book that like all of our like liberal grandparents or whatever were reading and thinking, wow, this is a really powerful critique of Donald Trump. And again, this is a bit of a different kind of media guy, a different kind of pundit than some of the other ones we've been talking about. But again, and this is very lucrative and influential in its own way.
It's almost like if you think less, you can get published more. I'll have to store that away in the back of my head for my own future endeavors. Luke, thanks for spending some time with us today to talk about Matty Boy and the sort of realm of media, that he is a powerhouse within. Where can people find your writing, find your work, yell at you about takes? Where can the Matt superfans reach you to say that actually, according to the data,
they're already in the comments of his post, by the way. I don't know if you saw that, but there's a lot of people that rushed in to defend Matt.
Well, and we haven't talked about it yet, but I'll give you the plugs in a second. But Iglesias, he tweeted about the piece, and actually, I just saw this morning, or maybe I think this piece came out yesterday. You guys should look this up because there's no description of it that I could give that would really fully do it justice. You need the headline thumbnail combination. But he's written a piece that is, I guess, occasioned by my piece and also by an essay in Current Affairs about him by Nathan J. Robinson. And the piece is called, "I've Been Right About Some Things. Is Matt Iglesias Always Wrong? An Investigation." And then there's this picture of him where, so he's put a picture, so he's referring to himself in the third person, and then he's got a picture of himself in his own post on Slow Boring. And the picture is, you have to kind of see it for yourself. It's like his face is, he's looking up at into the heavens, and his face is sort of like shrouded in light. And yeah, he looks like a guy who's just, he's achieved wonk enlightenment.
He's so cool.
He's come back to Earth to share his kind of wonk truths with all of us, all of us mere mortals. But I haven't read the piece, but he name drops me. He name drops Nathan, and he says something about how I was plagiarizing Nathan because there can't possibly be two pieces about how I'm bad and wrong. There's only allowed to be one. Them's the rules. But anyway, people can check that out if they're interested. You can find me on Substack at Luke W. Savage. I'm also on the artist formerly known as Twitter under the same handle. You can find me there. You can check out my podcast at patreon.com/MichaelAndUs. I think that's all the plugs.
I just looked up this, the Slow Boring post that you referenced, and it is Truly incredible. I'm going to have to put a link to it in the description just so people can see this. And I like that in the opening line of it, he refers to his critics as the leftist hater brigade, which I guess this podcast has entered the chat.
It's the
so
new
good,
groups.
Good to speak with you, Luke, and join you in this coveted brigade I've heard so much about.
Always a pleasure. It may be a long road, but in 20 years, we will build the necessary factional power to take over the Democratic Party.
And from there, we will ensure that high-rise condos are constructed on every street corner.
It's my favorite group.
So, like we mentioned at the top of the show, we also talked to Luke a bit about Chorus, which has been in the news. This is what would you call it? A marketing firm, a media operation that has been paying some left-leaning content creators online as much as $8,000 per month to push the Democratic Party line, more or less. He had some interesting thoughts to share, but if you want to hear those, you'll have to come join us on the premium feed next week.
Yeah,
This
come
week.
join us. I'll be caffeinated. We record these at night. It's going to be exciting.
If you want to support the show and get access to those premium feeds, we've got a link to the Patreon in the description. We hope you'll join us there. But I think that about does it for this week.
Yeah.
So
All right, guys.
we'll see you next time.
Good talking to you.
I'm floating down